Sure. So Jack and I today are going to talk a little bit about a new sort of framework and workshop that we've been working on through the Design Futures Initiative. We both have our own sort of separate practices and things we're interested in. We'll kind of touch on that briefly and sort of our perspectives, but we do want to, so we'll probably focus a little bit more today on like, this framework and this project, since it's something we've been working really closely on for the last year and a half. And then at the end, we can sort of answer some questions about it as well. So I'm Doc Martens, they, them, their pronouns. By daytime, I am a UX designer at a nonprofit called Teach for America. I also, by night, my 5 to 9, I do a lot of work with the Design Futures Initiative. I sit on the board as our Director of Communications and Special Projects. So that includes things like moderating the Slack, doing social media, sort of helping members of the global Speculative Futures community like rev up projects they might want to do. I mentioned on the chat earlier, we've been working on something called a methods library, where I'm working with Damien Lutz and Ben Loden and some other people from the community who've created lists of speculative resources. And we're putting those together into like a searchable database, because we got a lot of questions about, there's so many methods out there. How do I find it? I'm a student. I want an entry to this. So that's something to look out for. And we can give you an invite to that Slack channel in the chat at some point. I also do a little bit of teaching at Parsons School of Design. My master's was in design and technology, which is sort of like creative coding, technology, futures, designy thingies. I don't know what you want to call it. And then sort of my passion projects are, I do a biweekly speculative events and resources newsletter called SciFly, which for me, when I got out of grad school and sort of missed this stuff, I say I'm more of a curator than a creator. And that's something I had to kind of get used to after going through an MFA program, but I really like curating people and ideas around this. And so this is like my way to just connect people around the world to cool stuff happening. And as I call it, like keeping your brain like flexibly speculative. And I'm just a huge sci-fi nerd. I know some other people talk about how they got into this. I will say, and I've actually been thinking about this, the way I first got into the futures is when I was about 12 years old. I participated in, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but there is this thing called the Future Cities competition. And you'd actually have to design a city in SimCity, like SimCity 2000. And then you would have to go and you have to explain parts of that city and make it real for people. And so that was my first sort of approach to building something and having to imagine out a future city and its infrastructure and how people would communicate. And it never really occurred to me until sort of I heard you guys talking about it. But that was kind of what inspired me to get into this. And I just didn't realize it for like another 15 years until I got back to grad school and was like, yes, this is what I need to be doing. So that is my I guess, like, I don't know if anyone's ever seen, but I'm a cheerleader, but that's my route, my speculative route. That's more to my intake into it. Jack.
What's up, y'all? I'm senior design strategist. I'm Jack. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm senior design strategist right now at a place called Jam 3. It's kind of an experience design agency. We do like lots of immersive experiences, AR, VR. We build digital worlds. A lot of it is sort of brand focused. So Adidas and Google and Complex and those kinds of things. People with big money tags being able to write checks to do weird things and experiment to help you buy more sneakers and stuff like that. But nonetheless, it's fun to do weird stuff, and they're pushing the bounds of some immersive things. I helped co-found the DFI along with Phil. I met him in a bar. After in my graduate program, I became obsessed with speculative design. Tony and Biona were my professors at the time. When they first came to Parsons, I was like the first person who was like, "Oh my God, like you're at Parsons now?" Was like, I regretted not going to the RCA, but now I guess I don't. Now I've played my card. Now I'm the best futurist of all. I foresaw this coming. And so after school, wanted to start something, wanted to like get a meetup going, and realized that someone else already had a meetup going, and thought, why don't I do the New York chapter of that, and asked them if I could start a chapter. And that kind of became how we have chapters now. Things just kind of things have gone a little off the rails, but it's cool. Also, this is the thing that we've been working on, Doc and I together, along with Adam, and in partnership with the Kedge Future School. What you'll see today, some of the stuff is took off from my thesis, for a framework that I had been developing in my thesis in like 2017. I was really obsessed with experiential futures. That's like how I like that. There was that one paper, I think it was like called that Jake wrote with Stewart. That was like the experiential turn. Like that was like, I just like tried to redo that paper in my thesis, basically. I mean, in my own flavor, but I was obsessed with that paper. And then, yeah, still a Parsons affiliated dude. I can't seem to get off the email list, so I'm gonna put it up there. And then I recently relaunched something that the thesis work that has gone through a bunch of iterations now, and I just relaunched that today because I figured, you know what, Earth Day, my project was about AI and nature, and I want to start tracking signals and doing work around it again. So deepaffinitylab.com, renewed the site today. Feeling
Fun fact, I was one of Jack's user testers for that, like in a back room at Parsons. So other stories, Jack and I graduated the same year from Parsons. Jack was in Trans D and I was in design and tech, and our program shared the floor. Not like reluctantly, but we were very different. We used to make fun of them that they like made workshops, and they would make fun of us that we made lights blink. And so Jack and I got to know each other through this. And it was really fun to sort of come together and bring those different perspectives, right? That creative technology, prototyping, futures, with those frameworks and those experiential workshops. And so it's been really cool for the two of us over the years to just get to work together more closely and keep working on stuff like this. So we're going to give our little spiel on why we should do this work. We're going to kind of keep it brief because I think honestly, like Jake and Kelly and Jose and everyone else, like really just, and sorry, and Tamie, like really touched on this. And so we're just going to go through it quickly. So why should we speculate, right? Speculation is a lens for working across disciplines. I like to call it speculative X, right? Speculative designer. I met someone who's a speculative ethnographer. My goal in life is to be like a speculative wizard. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know, right? But speculation is a lens for working across disciplines. It talks about like, why do we do this work? And it talks about different ways in which we can do it. And the reason that I think it's maybe becoming more and more prevalent in today's world is that's because more and more people and organizations are starting to realize that speculative thinking is really important when the world's changing very quickly, right? It helps people sort of navigate this. People like to use this term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, I got it, global setting, right? So when things are changing very quickly, we sort of maybe lose some of the beliefs and the stories, the metaphors that have long governed how we think the world should work, and traditional definitions of everything from power and gender and life expectancy, the nature of work and play, and even reality, if you've been reading the news about simulations, are being called into question more and more often for us as humans. I would argue more so than they may have in like the last 2,000 years, right? And so we need a way to sort of navigate this and to understand how we could be part of it. And one way to do that is by doing speculation. And the reason for this is that stories are powerful, right? When we tell stories through designs, through speculative fiction, through other sorts of speculation, it really allows us to explore and to relate to and critique these visions of the future. And eventually we can start to like attune ourselves, right? I think of that like, what is that? The dowsing stick, right? Can sort of attune ourselves to those futures that we find preferable, and more importantly, that the most people find preferable. So what is our job? Our job is to challenge the probable by exploring the possible and sometimes the preposterous. And our goal for doing so is to put new options on the table so we can identify the preferable, right? By being these better sense makers today, by noticing and discerning what futures are emerging from the present, we can really think about how we can do that. But the one thing futures stories can't do on their own is making the futures we want real. And for that, we really need design, right? So why design? Well, I think you've heard a lot of times that, design is important because we increasingly lived in a designed world, right? The majority of the products and the services and the technologies we experience today are arguably designed for us versus maybe nature, 1,000 years ago, sort of wandering around, we didn't touch things that others designed quite as often. And so for this reason, we can relate to other people, even if they're fictional future other people, through the products and the systems and the services they use, and sort of more intimately understand the world they live in, and empathize, right, with their daily joys and challenges through this like shared language of the quotidien, right, the everyday. And so one quote we really like is that design makes futures. What designers make becomes the futures we inhabit, right? And so if you are a designer like me, that's really important to think about, right? It's really important to think about the responsibility of what you're putting out in the world and what futures they sort of open up or close down for various people. And this is something very dear to me, as someone who's queer and non-binary, right? Thinking about, how people are opening up and closing down futures where I get to exist as a person, or I get to be happy, or I get to feel loved and be included, right? And so most people think design is sort of about problem solving. And this is, sort of straight out of speculative everything, right? But we think that it can be also used as a means of speculations about how things could be, right? And the act of realizing these speculations through design allows us to more sort of carefully examine these implications and consequences. And so as designers, it's really our responsibility to learn to speculate constructively, right? To so constructively speculate and to better articulate and to tangibly communicate the different preferable futures we imagine, and to sort of come together. And I like to call it like the some preferable future, right? What is the most preferable future for the most people, and how do we sort of bring the most people to the table to decide upon that? And so just a fun quote, in a rapidly changing world where ideas can gain scale in an instant, we need better ideas for preferable futures. And this is sort of our responsibility to do, right? At the end of the day, it's our responsibility to bring this together. You can go to the next one, Jack. And so what does that mean? So we need to anticipate and contextualize emerging possibilities of the things we're making today, right? Like we always like to say in like creative tech, like, oh, I was made it because it was cool. Like I just wanted to try it. I just want to see if it would work. I just wanted to get the light to blink, right? Just doing it was fun. But I think we really need to more carefully think about some of the possibilities of the things we're putting out into the world, and futures thinking is a way to do it. I also think it's a way to challenge sort of dominant narratives. I like to use the term weird for white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And then I added heteronormative and cisgender because I went to Smith College, and we love saying heteronormative patriarchy if you've ever heard anything about Smith College. But right, so this understanding that our perspective often as professionals in the design community is quite weird for the majority of the other people on earth, and really being aware of that as we do this stuff. Collectively imagining alternatives, right? Coming together to imagine things, bringing that diversity into the speculation. And finally, empowering people to build future agency. When things are really complicated, it's really hard for the everyday person to feel like they actually can shape their own and others' futures, that they can participate in sort of the complexity and move the levers. And I do think that futures thinking and speculation can help people sort of build that agency to think that they have a right to sort of shape their own and others' futures at the personal, the organizational, or even the community level. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jack, and he's going to talk a little bit about this Futures by Design framework and the workshop we've been developing.
Thanks, Doc. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So this framework sort of begins from. I always think about this practice as being like travel in a way, that we build these worlds and we travel to them, and then we bring other people with us, or we help them make something in that other world, and they make a souvenir sort of, and they bring it back. And that this everything that when I was like trying to contextualize what this practice is, it's always felt like travel. And so this framework begins sort of from where do we travel, and what are the mindsets that we use while we travel into different spaces. And I think one of the things that I like, the goal that I know that the Design Futures initiative has, and just me in general, is just trying to bring this practice to more people. Just trying to like get more people to be like, anyone can do this. Like you can do it. Like there are ways to do it. And I think we run a danger of going the design thinking route, where now everyone's like, I went to a corporate design thinking course, and I can iterate my way out of social problems. that is not what we're trying to say here. But does help to sort of build sort of a set of mindsets to contextualize sort of like what your frame of mind should be as you try and move through this, and sort of help people to begin to put a process to this. I felt like I hear a lot of talks where there's no process, or I was hearing a lot of talks where people were like, there's not really a process. You kind of like follow your way through, you do your thing, and I don't know. I guess I've always felt like there is sort of a macro process, and that we could maybe zoom out and find. That being said, every time José presents, his process, just like, I'm just like, I don't have any process. I don't know what process is. Yeah, but also, yeah. So our mindsets are now in this is sort of how the mindsets that we're thinking about moving through. They should be pretty familiar, but also pretty accessible. Extrapolate, create, experience, strategize. One of the things we wanted to focus on with this framework is that strategize question. I feel like it's time and time again, so many people are like, yeah, but then what? Like, you made the thing and it was cool, but then what? Like, and just trying to make sure that that is built in with the process from the beginning of saying like, and then the outputs of the conversations that are generated from the prototypes, we need to create strategy around those things, or we need to update the prototypes that we made, or challenge how we think about what we were proposing. So I'm gonna click, double click, and then triple click into this framework, and it's all built on this idea of travel. The first one is around traveling from the present to the future. Whenever we're doing this, we need to take that mindset that we're in currently, and we begin to shift towards the future, right? We collect signals, we start to imagine, we take ourselves there mentally. And so this first axis is really built around the travel from the present to the future. The second axis is built around from the real to the imaginary. I like to think about that. There are real concrete signals that are existing that exist in the present, that we begin to sort of say, oh, this is, if we were to logically put a line out and extend one out, then it would feel very like just that realness, versus sort of, all right, let's sort of like question and drift a little bit. Let's let our mind sort of like imagine what's possible. And so that sort of that other stretching begins, but that happens between sort of like the real and the imaginary for me. And now this builds sort of the framework of the mindsets that we'll move through. So the 4 mindsets then map into the top left being sort of the extrapolation of real signals, real things that are happening today in towards the future, as you move towards pushing them to the imaginary. When we're directly in that future world and we're immersed in that imaginary space, where I guess I can double, this begins the double click. So we take those the real emergent signals and futures today and expand their implications as we move deeper into the future, still feeling fairly grounded to the realities of today. And then we move sort of creating into that future world, right? And now we're into more of a mindset of really like, we're in the future and we're imagining the things that are there. We're looking around, we're picking up objects that exist in a future world that we've created, and we're prototyping these scenarios and artifacts. Then begins sort of the process of moving back towards the present, right? Like, if we've just traveled and now we're like on the plane ride back, and we have a bag full of souvenirs that we're bringing back to show other people. And when we're showing them, the purpose of that is to generate discourse and engage their emotions around it. I always like that. This is really about the experience of these things, right? Engaging people's emotions. I was just reading something on, like, it's Earth Day today, and so a publication put out like Earth 2121, and it was like articles imagining what the future of Earth is. And I read each article, and each article is just a description of what's wrong today. There was no, like, it was very like a journalistic perspective of, or take on, the future is, well, the problems that we have today. And so 2021, like the small sentence that is envisioning the future is not engaging emotions. It doesn't actually get people there. to where they're actually considering what this means at a very visceral sense, back to that sort of experiential turn. And then once we have people in that mindset, we need to really begin to map the consequences while they're feeling that, while they're in that headspace. That's the perfect time to strategize how to do things differently. I think sometimes we interact with projects and they're kind of like, wow, what a cool project. Like, what an interesting thing that brings up so many questions. And, I show my mom a project, right? And she's like, what an interesting world we live in. This is so interesting. But the next conversation should probably be like, yeah, so like, what are you thinking about differently now that for retirement? Like, maybe we should plan something. What's our retirement plans now? So now the triple click, starting back in the top left. All of this really, to me, begins, and Dan and I had a number of conversations around like, how does this begin? Well, it sort of begins with questioning an assumption that you have about the future, right? Or your present, right? To the question that was a lot earlier asked, maybe I think it was the first question of the night, is like, sometimes just finding something that you saw that is a question, and just something that you're like, that's so weird. What a strange thing. Why don't I just play that out all the way and see what it is? I just saw a project by Liam Young that was Planet City. And the project begins from I think you read something that was like, everyone in the world could live. If you took the density of, I forget what city, it was like, it was a neighborhood maybe in Mumbai that was like, if everyone lived at that density, or maybe it was in Shanghai, it was like, everyone lived at that density, we could all live in a city the size of like Delaware. Though all those numbers and states and references are wrong, but it was like that, just like that idea was like, you know what if made a short film about like, what if in a future we all just decided that we're all going to live in one city together and let the rest of the planet heal while we just live on top, like in a really dense place. Super fascinating, just beginning of a question, right? And then it turns a whole project. So the triple click here, expanding signals, and then there's this move towards building worlds as you move into the imaginary. And then we're prototyping those interactions within those worlds. And then as we bring them into the experience, we love to bring back that design language around critique, iteration, testing them, and really tuning those provocations. I think it's underestimated the degree to which the projects that we see online, that we see in museums, that was not the first iteration of the project. It was not like I had an idea and that's it. That project went through so many different people's reactions, and they were like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Is this a thing? Just so many people normally see those projects before they get to like the MoMA, right? The ones that we see in the MoMA, where I'm always like, oh my God, and they made this. It's like, well, yeah, like, but it took a long time. So there's that tuning that needs to happen. And then the experiencing of them, engaging emotions, really becoming the core there, the considering consequences being that move back towards reality, back through the present and back into the space of let's plan some actions. And once you've done that, you get to go back into the cycle, right? You get to go back into that. Well, are the actions we planned, are those the right things? Let's take a look back. Let's question our assumptions again. And so it's sick, like it's not linear, very much like all design processes. It's not linear. You can sort of see a really cool signal and just be like, I'm gonna go make something. Like I like, all I can think about is how insane that idea that could exist in the future. I'm just gonna build something right now and see what people think about it. I feel like there are whole Instagram accounts that are just like full of people just like seeing a thing, making a thing, putting it out in the world. The other thing is you could start with strategizing. You could be like, look, this is our strategy for the future. Let's make something. Let's just like make a prototype really quick to think about it. You could start at the prototype phase, right? There's tons and tons of design teams that are like prototyping things and then not really situating them in a future or what they could mean. So you could start with a design team. Let's start with your prototype and let's like build a scenario around what that could, and extend the world that could be in. So it's non-linear, but I feel like there's lots of moves that can be made within this.
I just want to piggyback off that, Jack. If you go back to the last slide, I think, earlier we were talking a lot about there is no one definitive way to do this work, right? There are so many tools out there for doing all of this stuff. And what the way we like to think of this is really as sort of our philosophy on the different types of mindsets that can help you go through this work. But the idea being that the activities and the things you do can be very plug and play, right? So of course, for our class, we have certain activities that are going to move you through these spaces, but we're not saying that those are the only activities you can do, right? Or that you have to do it this way. One thing we do in my UX design team is we call things foundational and directional. Foundational meaning you're doing a project with all of the steps of the design thinking all through the phases versus maybe just doing one. I like to think about this framework the same way. You can choose one of these areas and play within it. You could choose two of them, right? But what it really does is it just sort of brings together what are the different modes of thinking one typically does when approaching a speculative project. And we don't think this is the be all end all of this whatsoever. And we're not trying to say like everyone should be doing futures in this way. So I think that's the caveat we want to put out to the community that, this is after lots of conversations and to Jack's point, him doing all this work in grad school, we found that over the years that these are sort of the modes and the mindsets that help us move through this work. And then that's what we're trying to sort of share in this model and in this workshop. And so the next slide, you'll get to see a little bit in action. So what we did is we actually took that idea and we created, because we love mural now, we created actual mural canvas where people can be guided through different activities to move them through the work. And as we said, these are not the only activities. We like to think of it as very plug and play, but we have a set of activities in the workshop that we like to move people through. And we kind of say it's like training wheels, right? Like this isn't how you're going to go do it with your team. This is how you're going to do it for yourself this quickly. And we just move people through it very fast. But the idea being that you get a taste for how these activities connect together and move your sort of thinking along this track. And so if you're interested in our class, our next session is going to be Friday, July 30th and Saturday, July 31st. We're trying to do Friday, Saturday, and we're going to have another one in October, probably more situated for people in Europe time zones. And then eventually, once we're allowed out again, Jack and I hope to be able to teach this class in person in various cities. We're also working with Andres Valencia to potentially translate it into a Spanish language version in the future. And we're really interested in collaborating with people about maybe putting into other languages as well, because this is something we really do want to spread and to bring into the world. And I know, Jack, I think you put some graphs in. I was like,
and then
Jack,
of course, this is the three-dimensional one. My favorite thing about these graphs that began with Elliot's like 1.0 is how most people kept to like the color scheme. Like people like why? No one was like, everyone's like purple. We got to do purple and we got the turquoise. Even Mazaki's is like still in the and this is for like capabilities, which I actually just like really love this. I think about like when I'm trying to decide like where should I upskill, I'm like, all right, like where am I moving around? I need to get better at contextualizing or facilitation. I need to up my empathy methods. I always need to plan, like organize better.
I just think of it as an RPG. I'm going to train in like smithing for a week by just smithing iron bars. I'm just a nerd and I talk about video games and sci-fi a lot. If you want to hear me talk about that in futures, we can have another conversation.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Stop sharing so we can.
Oh yeah, we'll put those links in the chat. Well, I'll put mine in. Yours is speculative now, right, Jack?
Mm-hmm.
.com?
Awesome.
That's Jack's website. That's me. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
questions, comments, snide remarks. That's what I was teasing. That's my teacher used to call us that.
And again, if we can read them from the chat. Feel free to unmute. It's after 9, so anything goes. This is the wild card hour. It's after 9 for me. It's after 10 for y'all.
I hate to miss the wild card, but I got to put some kids to sleep. This has been really, really great. Great to see familiar faces and new ones. And please, I hope there'll be another time we get together.
Bye, Jake.
Aloha.
Hey, Jake.
Hi.
Thanks a lot.
I have a question. Really loved that. Thank you for sharing and walking us through it. Just the mindset piece really stood out for me in thinking of how do you get people to the different headspaces for each stage? Like, do you have any rituals that you're experimenting with or processes to get people to get there together?
I mean, I think we do definitely, as I said, like we have certain activities like which guide us through it. So I think it's okay if I like share some activity. So like we do things like implications wheels, right? We do things like, to your point around personas, right? Like trying to think about how do we do personas at the scale of a world, or how do we map worldviews? And so we'll bring activities and we'll sort of do them in an order that sort of stimulates those mindsets through the doing of the activity. And I think we also do, we also do a couple of warm-ups and stuff, right? We have like fun warm-ups and stuff to just get people being speculative. Future Flip, which is the online version of it's a thing from the future, like something we really like, just to get people like doing quick prompts, right? So just thinking of all the things you almost do in a design thinking workshop to stimulate those mindsets, and then bringing that speculative lens onto it. And I just think of it this way because I come from a UX design background, but very similar to you got to go through the process to like embody the mindset. You can sort of break yourself down, or like doing the activity puts you into the mindset.
I also think that and I would love to have a longer conversation about rituals for getting, and like specifically the reason why you use like the word ritual, right? Like it's like really getting people like in that space. Cause I really do think about it like travel. I think in our class, we don't really like do like a deep travel experience, right? But some of the work that helped inform like how we design this is really about like visualizations, right? Like reading narratives, closing your eyes. I used to Doc in one of these. I used to bring people into like a dark room and project like crazy scenes on the walls, and then read like things that I had written about what I was like. I used to have this workshop that was about like a digital forest and how we might be able to walk around the forest, like talking to all of the trees with new kinds of interfaces, and what might those interfaces look like. And to get people in that headspace, we would like sit inside of a forest, and I would read them like crazy things that had been written. Like so like there's definitely like an aspect of taking people there, right, and bringing them with you, and all of the sort of like tricks and things that get people in that headspace. And we try in the class, we try and illustrate some of those things that are like in your tool bag. And what I like, part of the reason why the framework feels like pretty open is because I feel like in each one of those spaces, like certain people are going to bring like different kinds of tools to that moment, and they're going to use their own way of doing that, whether or not it's like a meditation in the futures space, or if it's like something very physical, or if in the experience space you might be like very artifact driven, and you might say like, my experience is I put this onto a table and we stand around and we have a conversation about it. Or my experience is I like put on a full costume and I walk around my neighborhood and I interact with people and I force them to have conversations with someone they think is from the future. Like the level of experience and how people use these different things in different moments, I think is like, to me, that's this exciting part about people finding their own practice. That was a long.
I would agree with that.
So cool to hear like how because it is experimenting too, like you're trying different things and it won't work for everybody, but like finding the way to own in on the practice. I guess when you were sharing that, I was just thinking of the Disney method. I don't know if anyone's used that in ideation before, but supposedly Walt Disney had like 3 separate rooms for one room for dreaming, one room for the realist, and one room for the skeptic. And they were physical rooms. The dreamer room was the biggest. The realist was like moderately sized, and then the skeptic was the smallest because you're supposed to spend the least amount of time there, or the critic was the least amount of time. But like that idea of like transferring someone to a physical space, I don't know, just interesting to think about how we do that in virtual settings too.
Embodiment, right? Embodiment's such an important idea. Like one thing we talk about a lot in our class is, why is design important? Because you're objectifying the subjective, right? You are taking what's in your head, like we all have a vision of the future, but being able to construct that through design actually makes us realize it a lot more contextually, a lot more for other people, right? We have critique, we have to build it. It's a lot easier to maybe, depending on sort of your style, to think and imagine and talk about the future. But when you actually have to build stuff, which is why we really focus on different types of prototyping within that create phase, it really forces you to sort of realize your speculations somewhat into reality. And as a creative technologist, like that's always been really cool for me, because it's always been about sort of, using technology or emerging technology to try to like fake stuff, right? Like I did a thesis project where I used like an NFC reader to fake the idea of putting a blockchain like seal in a piece of furniture, so that when you scanned the seal, it would show you the manufacturing lifeline of the chair. Now, I didn't know how to write stuff to a blockchain. At the time in 2017, I really didn't know how to, I built the chair, which was interesting, through CNC, but just through that like little bit of digital wizardry, I was able to illustrate my point, right? And so that's what, I think there's all, that was sort of the way we learned to do some of this stuff, versus people who might do like architectural things, who do storytelling, do writing, right? Whatever your sort of way is. Business plans from the future I've seen are really cool. Speculative corporations, right? Everybody's got that expertise that they can bring into speculation to do that kind of work. Oh yes, mark making, the definition of design. Sorry.
Yeah, I geeked out, and like this was a while back for an article. Like I looked deep into it, and it's like to make a mark, right? Like design is an applied discipline. Oftentimes you're the one that's like, you instantiate something, you manifest something, you embody something. Like giving people like the term like boundary object. We're joking about this past weekend from stamps, right? Like give people a thing to speak to. There's power to that, right?
You want to be an etymology geek, to speculate actually means to take a unique vantage point, as if from a watchtower. So if we combine that with mark making, it means to take a unique vantage point as from a watchtower to make our mark. Sorry, I could do this all day. I'm a dork.
I have a thought. If I'm super taken with the word plural verse. You guys probably, but this is actually the first time I've ever really heard that used. I know about multiverse, which is something totally different, but I'm definitely going to explore that some more after tonight and like kind of look into that and think about what that really means. And it just kind of caught my attention, I guess. And then obviously there's just a lot of ideas I have about creative problems that we have and what are some creative solutions. And I think I'm going to be thinking about it through the lens of futures thinking like this. So I really appreciate being here tonight. So I just caught this through LinkedIn, Adam. So thank you for posting it there in the last handful of days. So anyway, I'm really glad to be here tonight and really appreciate everyone's experience and points of view.
I was pretty sure just Jack's going to get a book about pluriverses.
Yeah, you should read this.
There you go. Nice. Designs.
Like,
yeah, that image came up actually when I was searching while I was listening to you guys, and that design came up. So
yeah,
that is it.
We don't have the slide, but we have a really cool slide in our workshop where it's like, if you think of futures cones, like the thing people forget is like a cone is just one person, right? Like one person's cone. Like when you actually take lots of people, plurality, right? You actually have all of these different cones that don't quite overlap because everyone has a different version of the future. And when I think of like pluriverses, I kind of like to imagine that image of like, here's all these different cones sort of overlapping, and like, where do they maybe meet? Where do they really diverge? And like, what's at the edge and what's at the center of those things?
You ever deliberately construct dystopia visions or introduce simulated conflicts?
I've personally done it. Like in other practices, I have a friend who ran this really cool conference. I think we're called like dark designs. I had a teacher who had us write like dark papers once instead of black papers instead of white papers, which was like intentionally a white paper for sort of a dystopian future. We took a class called post-planetary design, but I haven't specifically, we don't specifically do that through this workshop. But we do ask people to come up with like positive and negative implications of the artifacts presented, right? So we can sort of think about how do we map both of those into strategy, not just one or the other. But I do I'm a big fan of thinking of, I'm like a total Slytherin, so like I get a kick out of like imagining the dystopias. I also am working on like a personal method. I really believe in the power of science fiction to sort of give people the language to talk about the future. I've been on a couple of projects with people, one around like blockchain for manufacturers. And when we were trying to sit there and imagine the future, the only other person who could sit there and like use words with me was the other sci-fi geek, because we could be like, oh, well, it's like if you took the matter thing in Diamond Age, but combined it like, with the thing in Makers, and you threw it through the lens of, do androids dream electric sleep? So what it almost does is it gives you these like little like puzzle pieces when to talk about the future if other people are sort of versed in this. And so one thing I'm interested in is how can we look at science fiction and look at video games and things like that, and actually sort of like skip the beginning part and go to that future and bring artifacts back and think about what it tells us about what we fear and hope for today. Since all science fiction is, it's like 3D goggles, right? Like one lens is prediction, like what do we think is going to happen? The other lens is metaphor, because we can only write from today, right? I can't write about the future from the future. I can write about the future today. So most science fiction is about exploring real problems today in fictional places, so that you give people sort of the distance to be able to think about it without, to think about these things more constructively. Like I think Darko Suvin calls it cognitive estrangement, right? Like by putting it into this imaginary space, we can really think about what would that mean for me? So like an example of that is, there's a book called, I think, The Future War. And in this book, this guy like goes into space for 1,000 years and he comes back and like everyone's gay, right? That's just like what happened with the planet. And I always thought that was interesting because from his point of view, he feels very left out. He feels isolated. He doesn't know what to do. So as a straight person reading a book like that, it might allow you to sort of put yourself into the space of like, what if that was the world? How would I feel about it? And then back empathize with what it might feel like to be queer today, right? And so I think that this is sort of like comes into that as well with science fiction, and especially or speculative fiction, and sort of you see people doing all this like sci-fi prototyping and these companies doing it, right? So I think there's like some interesting spaces to be explored there as well. And that's why I think, Jack and I keep saying you could jump in at different points, right? So maybe I just want to like, instead of extrapolating myself, I want to use somebody else's extrapolation, go find artifacts and then consider the consequences of them. And so, yeah, I really think this framework works with like lots of different ways you want to slice and dice things. Sorry, that was way too much talking. I could geek out about this all day. I've been drinking a lot of coffee to stay up for this panel.
I found that suggesting a future that incorporates uniforms in it is incredibly polarizing. People either love the idea of having uniforms or they react with incredible levels of outright revulsion.
Oh, I thought they were so cute. I lived in Melbourne for a year and I see all the kids in their uniforms. I don't know. I just want to get married, and like my partner makes fun of me. I want to get married in like both armor, but on a beach, like full, like, what do they call them? Like, colettes. And they're like, you can't do both. Like you're gonna be so hot. And I'm like, no, I want the whole like cool like uniform. I used to play with my Legos and they'd all have like different outfits and like the color of their pauldrons would like, I don't know, I'd make up these like, I'm playing with them now. I would like make up these like whole like scenarios around it. So I'm very for I kind of want fashion armor to be a thing. That's what I want. I want fashion armor to become a thing so I get to wear it.
And with that, we will tie things up. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you to everyone who hung out for the wild card session here at the end. A lot of people have been asking. Yes, I'm gonna share the recording. I'll probably share the recording in an easier way than YouTube prior to uploading it to YouTube. Probably like Google Drive seems like the right way to do it, Doc. Google Drive seems easiest. I'll probably put it on Google Drive after I edit it.
Share it on
I'm going to share the recording.
Oh, yeah.
Probably will do Google Drive. YouTube just seems like a hassle to me, but maybe I'll do YouTube too. But yeah, thank you so much.
Put it on the Vimeo, our Futures by Design Vimeo. We can ask Phil, maybe if we can upload it there.
That would be good. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Enjoyed it.
Wonderful gold mine of resources.
Brian. Hi, Brian. Bye, Brian.